Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the eDiscovery channel. This is Tom O'Connor coming to you live from across the fairgrounds in lovely downtown New Orleans, Louisiana, where it is 58 days until Jazz Fest, which is the, of course, most important timeline that we have anywhere.
Now that Mardi Gras is over, that
Yeah,
is.
exactly, exactly. We're zooming right into prep for Jazz Fest. Rocky, as always, Rocky Messing, my partner in mischief here, as our friend Browning Marion used to say, back in Tel Aviv. Rocky?
I am home in Tel Aviv, so for another 5 days, and then we head stateside.
All
So
right.
yeah,
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we are really pleased today. We were just talking a little bit ahead at the recording with our to have as our guest today, Andreas Muller, who many of you may not know. I've known Andreas since we worked together at Advanced Discovery a number of years ago. He's got a deep background working in forensics and e-discovery, advanced modus DTI. Now is the founder and CEO of Downstream. So you're driving your own bus now, huh, Andreas?
I am indeed. It's quite a different ride. It's different than what I expected.
well,
Well,
we'll
listen.
definitely get into that.
Yeah. So here's I knew that about you, and like I said, we worked briefly together, um, and that was most pleasant from my perspective, at least. I don't know how it was for you.
Oh, it was amazing.
I
It
can
was
take a guess
amazing.
at that. Come on, working with Tom.
Are we recording already?
But tell us a little bit about your background, like where you grew up, went to school, got trained, and we try to segue initially into how did you get into this wacky business?
That's a great question, and I wanted to say up front, thanks very much for allowing me the chance to spend some time with you, fine gentlemen. So where do I come from?
Gentlemen.
Many,
Yeah.
many years ago, I was born in Nuremberg, Germany, and I also grew up there for the first 20 years of my life. My parents ended up moving to the States. My mom had married an American GI who was stationed down the street. They moved to the States when I was 16. They bought a condo and said, there's your condo, here's your school or college, and you go and finish college in Germany and then figure out what you want to do.
Oh, interesting.
So it was quite, you have to grow up very, very early. So grandma lived like 20 or so kilometers, like 14, 15 miles away from the condo. From an educational perspective, I attended what's called non-classical secondary school. So think of it almost as a college prep school or a
Yeah.
preparatory school as an equivalent, but it had nothing to do with what I'm doing these days. So I went for.
Sorry, is that like dormitory style, like boarding school, or is it more
Not that
local?
bad.
Not that bad. Okay.
Not that bad or exciting.
Yeah.
No, think of it as high school on steroids, essentially, as far as the learning purpose and the topics or syllabus is concerned. But I
I'm sorry
ended
to
up.
interrupt, Andrew. Did you have
You're good.
siblings? Were you an only child?
I'm an only child. Yes, I'm the
Ah,
spoiled rotten, or
so
at least that's what
yeah,
my
you
mom
went. I
called
was
me.
going to say they bought you a condo. I was lucky if my parents bought me lunch.
Well, it wasn't in my name though. Just for full disclosure,
It was for
I got
you.
to stay there.
Yeah, still that's great. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, quite all right. That's what we should do all the time anyway. When I was 16, I started my quote unquote college track, completely unrelated to what I'm doing these days in digital forensics, but I started in the hospitality industry. So take a step back. When I was 14, I was looking for just a job on the side, get some exposure to how working is out there. Because I see my parents work, I want to get some experience and obviously make a little bit of pocket cash or pocket money. I ended up working at a restaurant, just standing behind the bar pouring beers. I mean, that's the going drink in Germany, as everybody knows. And one of the days, the chef, it was like a small, call it a pub type restaurant, so nothing fancy. The chef came to me and said, "Hey, do you want to start helping me out in the kitchen?" And I said, "Hey, sure, why not?" So I started learning from him how to cook, how to even cut onions, how to fry steaks and everything else. So when I was 16, 2 years down the road, I started going into the hospitality industry and also attend the culinary art school. And the way that, unless you decide going to university, we don't really have college, we only have universities, you go to technical colleges in order to learn your craft. Kind of like you do here if you want to become a car mechanic, you go to technical school.
Yeah.
Trade school, exactly. So I did that for 2 years. It was a 3-year degree. I guess I was an overachiever and nerd, but also the class clown because I ended up finishing 2 years in and not after 3 years, taking my exams early. So I learned how everything works, sort of like front of the house, cooking, wait staff, a sommelier, wine, and everything else. And I wanted to know, well, how does it work in the back of the house? So working in a factory. And one of my neighbors worked for a large printing company that specialized in printing anything from newspapers to the pamphlets, the flyers that you get in the mail, so marketing things, postcards. And I ended up going for printing, multimedia, and desktop publishing. So that was my second degree, which was more technical. Graduated early again. Here comes the class clown, nerd, and overachiever, I guess. And when I was 20, I said, well, I've been all around Europe. I've been to Italy, Spain, France, anything you can think of. Let me go to America. Let me go check this out. And I believe I visited my parents in Texas in March. And in May, I was standing again before the immigration officer, him saying, "Whoa, hold on, you're back. Are you trying to like move here permanently?" And I was like, "No, I'm just visiting. It's Germany. We have school vacation every couple of weeks." In essence, so he let me into the country, and I think 2 days later, I was at the INS applying for.
So you
permanent
were
residence.
Americanized. Excuse me again for interrupting you. You were Americanized very early in that you learned how to lie to the government.
That's correct. That's correct. Now, don't ask me who my teacher was. I'm just going to plead the
Yeah,
fifth
that's all
there.
right.
That's another thing I learned.
It's a national tradition. That's okay.
But yeah,
Cool.
so that's how it started. That's how I came
Okay,
across the pond.
And you moved to Texas at the time with your parents, or you went somewhere else?
Good question. So my dad ended up retiring from the army after 2 years, or my stepdad, and they moved to Virginia, Newport News, Norfolk area in Virginia, Tidewater area as they call it. So I joined them there, trying to get a life or a feel of how is life in the States, right? How does it actually work? Everything is broad and spread out, and they don't show you the taxes when you look at grocery items on the shelf. You have to go figure out, well, if I'm going to buy this TV, how much does it really cost me?
Actually going to cost, right?
Right.
And the beer is nowhere near what it is in Germany, and you have speed limits, so all kinds of different things. Yeah,
all kinds of different things. By the way, the beer portion is a very sensitive topic. I do have to say we've come a very long way with our micro and specialized, breweries to give us a little bit more than just the average Bud Light.
So, okay.
I get no comment on that.
Yeah. Tom's going to skip that topic, but
I'm a recovering alcoholic and I wouldn't drink Bud Light.
But I believe the question ultimately was, how did I get into this industry?
Yeah.
And like a lot of, I don't want to call us old timers, but a lot of us actually had their first steps in the industry back in the paper days with companies like Icon, Knight Rider. Legal Week is coming up. I'm quite sure I'm going to see a lot of the quote unquote old timers that I've known, in the industry now for over a quarter of a century, which is kind of scary if you think about it. But I was working at the Marriott in Williamsburg, right next to Six Flags. It was the only place that was willing to give me a job without any type of American degrees or high school diploma or whatnot. And I was a bar back there. I think it was like $5.15 an hour plus $20 tips a day. And I was happy. I would come home, run home to mommy, so to speak, and be like, "Hey, look, I got like $25, $30 in cash. I got money. You don't have to pay for me anymore." That's a whole different story. And and I wanted to get back into the printing business because I really enjoyed that. But I realized that you have to go to college here, printing college, if you want to call it that. And I'm like, I don't want to go back to school. There's a reason why I got done with my 15 years of school and whatnot. Yeah, I don't want to do it again. So I found an ad in Boston because I was drawn to the New England area. It's kind of like the closest to Europe, unless you go to like Montreal or Quebec City. It's the closest to Europe that you can get. from the houses, the infrastructure, how everything is very close together, walkable. And I found an ad from Icon, and they were looking for a third shift manager in the copy business. And I'm like, well, hey, hold on. I've managed people, I've managed processes. Copy is not too far away from printing. And
Right.
so I applied. They had me interview with the managing partner, Andy was his name, in Richmond, Virginia. And the interview essentially was, hi, Andreas, nice to meet you. Come with me into the Icon van. We're going to go pick up boxes. And, we got to spend time together. He gave me the okay. I was flown up to Boston, and that's how I started in the copy business as a third shift manager.
Cool.
And look at
What
us
year
now.
was this now, or how old were you?
It was in 1999. I came here when I was 20, and then I was 21 years of age at that time. So just barely legal,
Wow.
or at least legal to buy beer.
Right.
Now,
Okay,
here's a fun
so-
one. By the way, here's a fun one. When I was visiting my parents, I was 18 years old. My dad was stationed in Killeen, Texas, and he had me, and I was meeting friends. He had me out, hang out with other people, and everybody was underage. So they sent me to go into the gas station with my German driver's license that
'Cause no
people
one's
didn't
gonna
even know what
understand
that was.
Right.
And I would come out with beer in hand because they would be like trying to figure out what my actual age is. And they were just like, I give up, just give me the cash. So I
Right.
was the beer guy.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, the dates are backwards and it's all confusing. So, right? Like, how's there a 23rd month? Like, it doesn't make sense. Anyway, so you start working in copy. When did you start moving over to electronic digital side? Like, and was that something that was calling to you, or did you just like happen to move on because that's where the company was pushing you?
Good question. So a lot that it's not so much these days anymore, but back then it was very common that you would have a 1 or a 2 year stint with a provider and then move on to the next one. It's still to a certain extent nowadays, but it's not as often or common as we saw like 20 some years ago. But I ended up switching companies, going a little step up the ladder each time, and it was copy, copy, copy. Well, one of my moves was with my old manager from Boston at Icon. He had moved over to Exact in Denver. So I ended up moving to Denver because I was laid off from Icon Managed Services right at Enron. So all of the businesses down there in Houston where I lived went south. So they had to do staff reduction because Enron was a huge deal, a big blow up for everyone. So I lost my job and I had talked to Adam, is his name, Adam Bowen. And some of you may actually know him, and he invited me to come to work for him in Denver. And a company down the street called Exact said, hey, do you want to come on board here? I'm like, fine, like get another step up now. I'm a production manager instead of a shift manager. And one day, Alan Tran was my old boss. He came into the production room. He had a box with a CD inside. And then he had a card with a scanner. And he said, here's iPro on the CD. Here's my box of documents. Over here is a scanner on the card. I need you to scan this box and give me a summation load file. So that's how I got into the imaging business.
And you're like a summation, what? Like
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I was responsible. I set up the software, everything else. At the end of the day, I got the document scanned in, had a summation load file. Everything was great. And then over time, we started going into eDiscovery. Specifically, when I got back with DTI up in Boston, we were the first satellite office with DTI that processed their own electronic data, their own ESI. Up until then, it was the National Technology Center in Atlanta, where DTI back then, or still is, headquartered, now Epic. And that's how eDiscovery started. And that was probably 14 years ago-ish, roughly. Okay. And after that stint at Modus, as Tom correctly said earlier, that's when I got into digital forensics. Went in, took over the forensics department after taking over the processing department, and then got my feet wet there, did my training and certifications and Lord knows what.
What did you know? Like forensics, forensics is interesting, and I want to actually dig in a little bit on your take on forensics versus or in conjunction with eDiscovery. But before we go there, forensics traditionally, most of the people who have gotten into forensics have gotten into it either through law enforcement or something outside of the true legal space. in terms of their training, maybe, computer science, something that like got deep into the weeds that then they were able to use to translate over into forensics. So you coming from the kind of traditional now, copy to eDiscovery side, getting into forensics, what was that like? What was that experience like? And was it, did you feel like a fish out of water? Did you feel like, hey, this is like, wow, okay, this is cool, I'm going to dig deeper into it? Kind of what was that experience like? Especially because a lot of the people who listen to this video pod, whatever we're calling it nowadays, but they're at different stages of their career, and some of them are looking to change up what they're doing. Some of them are just trying to figure out how to get into it. So that level of experience is very valuable to them. So especially having gone through that transition. So kind of what was your thought process as you went through that?
That's a really good question, by the way, because I do get emails a couple times a month from folks that are whether outside of the industry or they are in different, call it departments or segments of the industry, being interested in digital forensics. It was very intriguing because forensics literally is two buckets. On the one side, you have the collection aspect. While it's simple, it's not that simple, especially nowadays with all of the mobile devices and cloud-based data sources. Think of Slack and Bloomberg and Box.com, those type of things. But on the other side, that was really the intriguing part. I've always liked crime novels, crime movies, the Sherlock Holmes, the Miss Marples. That's right. So the analysis side. And there, especially if you take a look at the projects that we have nowadays, we are being asked in terms of like data egress or employees leave the company, think of like employer protection type scenarios. We have to put ourselves into the mindset of this either highly technical employee that left and potentially stole data, or just like not really technology savvy and they leave footprints everywhere. And that's what makes it exciting, because we always encounter, he or she was hiding their tracks, he or she, and nowadays, think of it, we have the phones, right? So we used to look on computers for evidence that data has left the station, so to speak. People are doing phone calls, they're doing FaceTimes, they snap pictures, right? And we don't even think about that. So that even goes way beyond the traditional thing that we're used to. And that's what I found intriguing. Did I feel like a fish out of water? In the very beginning, yes. But my first computer, for example, was a Citrix P166 processor. So think about the amber green screen type environments where you just deal with command line and you hack away trying to do I think my first program was ticket sales for a soccer stadium, how to calculate ticket sales that come in at different rates. That was my first program. But definitely felt a little bit out of water. But I think with the assistance of many colleagues, and that's what I keep trying to tell folks that are interested in the industry or already in the industry or in digital forensics, you can go and get 55 certifications. You spend those $50, $60, $70,000 on certifications. The true learning comes from, number one, hands-on, but number two, all of the great resources that we have in our industry where we work together, right? We can't know everything, right? I'm a Windows expert, I'm not a Mac expert. I'm a phone expert, but I don't know anything about computers. So those resources, and the internet is wonderful because now with GPT, you can just say, where do I look on a Mac for evidence that documents were printed, right? And GPT will tell you that. But maybe that really has helped. That's right. That's right. Yeah. But that's really helped. And that's made this feeling like a fish out of water. It made this feeling of being overwhelmed and not really understanding from the get-go, what are we doing here? How do we work? What tools are out there? That's why I revert back to my colleagues, industry experts.
So what training resources did you find to be the most helpful?
People's blog posts, literally like people's blog posts. So we have, and there's two different types of people who work in digital forensics. You got what I call the propeller heads, that are sort of like the lab rats, the really technical people. They tend to sit in the back of the house in the lab. You would never put them in front of a client. And then you got sort of like a mixed bag, like someone like I do. We're front of the house. We interact with clients, custodians, and then also we interact with the back of the house. The blog posts I found are the best because it's those lab rats that sit there, propeller heads or folks in the lab, that to just try things out. They stumble across something. Now they're going to make a blog post. They might create a GitHub repository to parse this information out so we can actually read it. And there's just the amount of information available nowadays just by doing a Google or a Bing search is amazing.
It's funny you should say that about the lab rats. I do a lot of pro bono work for the federal defenders, the federal public defender's office, and we typically have for years and years and years, when the government comes and seizes our client, the defendant's computer or computers, fairly rare in the old days, but more and more common now. Now it's not computers, as you said, it's cell phones. The January 6th insurrection case, in which the federal defenders represented maybe half of the defendants, half of 800 people. Everybody had a cell phone. Everyone, and some of them had multiple cell phones. But in the old days, we were exposed to forensics because they would seize a computer and then make a forensics image of it, and that's what they would produce to us. So we were forced to learn it from that end. Like, oh, great! Here's an what was it? An EO1?
An EO1, yeah.
Yeah, right. Like, here you go. Here's your production.
I know, right?
Yeah, like, what do I do with this? Right.
Yeah.
But the funniest thing was, once I remember calling. It was a big case up in the Northwest. It was actually, this is pretty funny. I've mentioned it before. The government went after about 7 or 8 members of the Hells Angels motorcycle club,
right,
and seized 22 computers. Right. That's when I knew the tide was really changing. If the Hells Angels had 22 computers, it's pretty darn sure that your business client is going to have stuff that they want. But anyways, I went to call the tech who was doing their processing was actually in Portland, Oregon. And it was, I think it was, as I recall, an ATF office that all the agencies used. That's where the technicians, where the lab rats were. And I was on the East Coast, so it was maybe midnight my time, and so okay, it's 9 p.m. But I didn't think anybody would be there, and so I just wanted to call and leave a message saying, "Hey, we got that delivery arrived. We'll take a look at it. Thanks a lot." Blah blah blah. The guy answered the phone. Right.
Of course.
I mean, and I just had this mental image of this guy, like you said, Andreas, the lab rat sitting there,
computers around him,
with racks of metal, shells with computers lined up on him, and he's sitting there over his computer.
Right.
Yeah. This poor guy sitting there in that lab all by himself. Oh my God.
By the way, it's no different nowadays. We still got the room full of a computer. It's not as bad though, because now we virtualize our machines, and all you need is a mouse, a keyboard, a monitor, and a network cable, and that's it, and you're good to go. But keep going. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
But the guy's still there at 2 a.m, right?
Well, absolutely, they're still there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the eDiscovery versus forensics, because for a long time people got those two phrases even confused or just use them interchangeably. I think nowadays most people don't, but definitely when you were getting into forensics, a lot of people were just like, oh, it's eDiscovery. You're going to take a forensic image and then blah, 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 blah. Like that was kind of like the standard that no one really understood what that meant. And what goes along with actual, forensics. And it's not just the technology, but it's the process around it as well. So from your take now, having been in this space, specifically the forensics and the discovery space for about 15 years, where do you see the differences? Where do you see people not, either where they should be used, where they shouldn't be used interchangeably? Kind of like, what's your take on that?
Another good question. I'm liking this, and I'm sad it's only going to be an hour. I would love to spend a couple more hours with you fine folks. But that was one very frustrating piece in the very beginning when I started branching out into digital forensics and talking with clients about it. And I love the bucket analogy. Everything is buckets for me these days. It really falls into 2 buckets. You have, if you just think about collections, you have forensic collection, which we refer to as forensic imaging. And then you have defensible collection. The defensible collection is generally for eDiscovery purposes, meaning we need to have a defensible way to acquire data with or without forensic tools, whether it's from phones, computers, servers, clouds, and then take that data that is visible and live and active and present that to the attorneys after some processing, keyword searching, culling, etc., for review and production. The forensic side, on the other hand, comes into play when we are going after whether it's file movement, computer activity, once you start diving out into cyber forensics, so the whole cyberspace, think about intrusion, malware, etc. But that really is a true need to create a forensic image. Most of the time, we remove hard drives from the computers to image them with like a hardware imager. We don't do a live image. Or if you have an employee for internal investigations that's suspected of misbehaving at work, and we need to be a little bit covert about what we're doing. But that really comes in that you have an analysis component. The attorney is not going to sit there and try to figure out how do I get the DNS log from my computer, like what websites and places my computer is going to. Attorneys aren't going to do that. That's going to be forensic analysts. But it really is a differentiator. Now, back in the old days, and that's where, or a while ago, that's where the UK still is, because we opened up an office a year ago in London, UK. So I got exposure to the European market again, and they're about 5 years behind us. In the UK or in Europe, everything needs to be a forensic image. There is no defensible collection, right? There is no, let me go and use like a self-collection application to go pull a couple of files from a computer. It doesn't exist over there. It's like you have to image the whole thing. And if it's 7 terabytes, image all 7 terabytes. Here, we've become smarter over time where it's like, as long as we can show, here's what was there, here's what we grabbed, here's how we grabbed it, and prove that you were green and blue here and you're green and blue there, that's all we have to do from a defensibility perspective. Do we use forensic tools for most of the work? Yes, we do, but even they've become smarter. And that's really like the differences, or where I draw the line, or the differentiator between what's truly forensics, what is defensible collection going into eDiscovery.
Right. Okay. And you've mentioned now 2 or 3 times about cyber and the cloud. You know, obviously, COVID helped accelerate cloud use. Companies that said, we are never, ever going to put our data in the cloud. All of a sudden, they couldn't wait to run to
and by companies, you mean law firms, right?
Well, no, major corporations. I mean, you know, it was amazing how, you know, at the time when I was working at Microsoft, and like the conversation switched so quickly.
Really, even at Microsoft, yeah.
Not for Microsoft internally. I'm saying Microsoft's clients that you talk to,
there you go,
who were, you know, the biggest banks, who were like, come back to us in 15 years and then maybe we'll consider, you know, you know, doing a pilot or something. We're rolling out Teams to their entire company in 30 days. I mean, you know, it just totally changed the approach. So from a forensics perspective, how has that changed what you do? Which will then lead us into the question about your company. So, but what you know, what have you seen change over the last 5-6 years with the massive adoption of the cloud and cyber? You know, and I guess privacy ties into it as well. But really, what's changed from your perspective, from a forensics point of view?
Yeah, so COVID helped with that a little bit. Right before pre-COVID, most clients wanted to have an in-person collection being done, whether it was for eDiscovery purposes or for forensic analysis and testimony down the road. The biggest change that we saw was the use of personal devices, but also the personal cloud. And here's the problem. If you go to your phone, for example, you're going to have, I believe I have like 7 different email accounts on my iPhone. When you go and compose an email, you may be sending or forwarding a company email by accident using your personal email account, right? That's just an example. Same thing can happen in Outlook too.
I mean, I do that, accounts. You do that. Tom would obviously never make such a mistake.
No, so. Absolutely not. No, flawless. Tom is absolutely flawless when it comes to that.
Yes.
Actually, Tom only has 1 email account. That's true. That's why it's a little bit easier for him.
Tom actually has 3 email accounts, but I don't tell anybody about the other 2.
Ah,
So see, now that's the other thing, right? That's where it gets really, really tricky. So
Right?
the use of clouds, the use of personal devices for company type, whether it's communication, housing of data, work product, and everything else, has really shifted. When COVID hits, and I always use it as a segue into, well, here's what we do different. Won't use it for now, but um, when COVID hit, a company with 1,000 employees didn't have 1,000 computers to give their employees. They didn't have a VPN infrastructure in place where people could use their own home computers to VPN and use like a virtual machine. They didn't have 1,000 mobile devices they could give to their employees. And that's really has been the biggest shift. Not so far in the cybersecurity perspective, although that gets tackled too when people are starting to use personal devices, personal accounts. The company can control what you install on there. Let me give you a little side tidbit, and you'll get a kick out of this, but also get probably scared. I was at my barber last week trying to get the roughage here straightened out for this video podcast, and my barber looked all like
appreciate it.
concerned and frustrated and was
Jeez.
babbling, "Oh, most welcome." Always trying to look good for you. And now you don't know what I'm wearing from the belt down,
Yeah.
but at least
Exactly.
I hope that the top works. That's right.
Rocky did
Um,
exactly the same thing. He dug out his
Exactly.
cleanest.
I got dressed up today. Look,
That's
I
right.
mean, I put on a fancy t-shirt.
I had a t-shirt on, but then I was like, well, no, I have to dress up just a little bit more, and I'm glad I did. So, you deserve nothing but the best. But my barber looked all like concerned, was mumbling to himself. He didn't seem himself. So I asked him, I'm like, Jose, what's going on? He's like, man, somebody like broke into my stuff, like digitally, hacked me. And I'm like, what do you mean? So I had him walk me through what happened. A couple of weeks prior, he was hanging out with a couple of friends. And there was one gentleman there he hadn't really interacted with before. And the gentleman kept telling him, hey, give me your phone. I want to show you something. Give me your phone. I want to show you something. Now, Jose has an Android device. The other person had an Android device too. And after 10 minutes of the guy just nagging Jose finally was like, well, let me give you my phone so I can get you quiet and you can leave me alone. Well, the only thing that the other gentleman did was tap the two phones together. So near field communication, or NFC, during the tap, an agent was transferred from the other person's phone to Jose's phone. Now, 2 days later, he gets a notification. Your Dropbox has now access to your Google account. Your Google Wallet was exported. Your photos have been uploaded. He's all like, what the hell? And then he started getting notification. Here's your 6-digit codes to reset your passwords. Starting 2 days after that, and over and over and over. So he went in every time he tried to access his Google account. Well, the other guy had already requested a new PIN code.
Right.
So he couldn't reset his password until ultimately, and that's how we knew before even doing a forensic analysis, because we did start going down that rabbit hole to see what actually happens. He was able to mute that phone notification, so block the number on his phone remotely, and that's what he used the agent for. And that's just scary. So think about that. You have company data on your phone. All it takes is a tap, and all of the company data that's unencrypted sitting on a mobile device is gone, or in somebody else's hands. And
right, accessible.
so that's really been the big differentiator, right? Something that was in a more controlled environment now is out and open, and there are so many more points of access that we get, right? Federal government is banning TikTok from employees' phones, for example, right? Our data is already out there. We were able to hide ourselves or be anonymous in the world, so to speak, like 10 years ago. That's all history. So, but we need to take further steps, obviously, to keep our confidential stuff confidential.
So any tips for the viewing audience on proper protocol and ways to protect yourself?
Absolutely. Get a flip phone and use pen and paper and envelopes and post stamps.
Write letters, yeah.
Yep, that works. Letters with disappearing ink, of course.
Yes.
That's right.
There was a great politician down here in Louisiana back in the 30s named Huey Long, the Kingfish. And he I thought was way ahead of his time, because he was quoted as saying once, never write in a letter something you can say on the phone. Right? Just don't memorialize it.
Yep.
Of course, that's out the window now with the advent of cell phones. But
yeah,
it's like, yeah, how do you avoid that now? I mentioned Jazz Fest earlier. Last year at Jazz Fest, we're all sitting in front of my house. I literally live right across the street from the fairgrounds, and we look up and there's a drone overhead, about 20 feet off the ground, circling us.
Yep.
So we all gave it the Royal Hawaiian salute and head off. But
I thought you were going to get the muskets out.
well, that was going to be, it is Louisiana. That was going to be next.
That drone, at least you could see. You don't know how many drones there are that are above that you're not even seeing and are watching what's going on.
To your point, one Monday morning, there was a front page picture in the local newspaper, an overhead shot of the fairgrounds. And it was clear that it wasn't high enough that it could have been taken. Well, I guess it could have been taken from a spy satellite, with the photography.
You mean one of those like balloons we've been shooting down?
But it was pretty clear that it was taken by a drone. So I sent an email to the person who wrote the article. I said, "Hey, what's the source of the photograph there?" And she said, "Well, we can't divulge our sources." I said, "Oh, really? Even if they're taking pictures of a public event and also peering into my backyard at the same time, I'm reasonably certain if an individual was walking down my street, leaned over my fence and took a picture in my backyard, not only would you have to tell me who he was, but I could bring criminal charges against him." But now, we've got, like you said, drones up where we're not even seeing them taking pictures, and it's being distributed, in this case, on the front page of the newspaper.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny because
First of all, the first mistake was, who reads a newspaper? Come on. Oh, you meant the website. That's what you meant.
No, it was on the newspaper. I'm old school. I do read the website, but I also get the paper delivered in the morning. I love the smell of newspaper ink in the morning.
Yes. Yeah. So, and Andreas, let's. So you left. You and Tom had worked together over at Advanced, along with a certain other mutual acquaintance of ours, who I believe made the introduction between me and you a couple years back. But you left when you left Advanced. You started your own company, which we talked about in the very beginning. Tell us a little bit about it. First of all, just what it is, what you guys are doing, what makes you different, and kind of how you decided to go down that road.
Good question. It's a story, it's a story essentially dear to my heart. After I left Advanced Discovery, I spent about 3 months touring Southeast Asia and some other remote parts of the world, just saying, I've worked, 18, 19 years in this industry. Give me a break for once. Yep. And then when I came back, I got an email from an old Modus colleague of mine who said, "Hey, do you want to do some collections for us on the side?" And I had nothing better to do. So I'm like, sure. And I started doing collections for them. And then somebody else reached out and said, "Hey, do you want to do collections for me?" So it was, little old me going out doing collections as Andreas, or AKM Consulting, as what I called it back then. But the work started being a little bit too much for me to handle. Plus, I was working out of my house, didn't have an office or anything else, right? My house was my data center, so to speak. So I asked CJ Cully, who was my second in charge at Advanced Discovery in forensics, "Hey, you want to do some work on this side?" Because he had just left Advanced Discovery. Sure enough, so CJ and I start doing collections together and sort of share, not necessarily the wealth, but share the income between the two of us evenly. Well, then Rick came up, Rick Hutchinson, and he said, "Hey, why don't you guys go found a company? Why don't you make this a professional business?" Okay, well, and that's how everything started. So September 19th, 4 partners got together and said, "Here's downstream, here's what we're going to do. We specialize in digital forensics, anything from being a subject matter expert to a solutions architect, forensic collections, imaging, defensible collections, eDiscovery, going over to forensic analysis and testimony. That's our wheelhouse and nothing else." And the main reason behind that, why we said it's going to be, knock on wood, a success going forward in the future, is forensics doesn't get a lot of love or attention in our industry, right? It's almost like the necessary evil. When I looked at companies and still look at companies, the forensics department generally gets the least amount of R&D, gets the least resources. And it's also the first department where revenue gets cut in proposals or charges get cut, I'm going to give you collections for free because I got you for
You're gonna
12
get
months
so
sitting in
much later.
relativity for monthly recurring revenue. But
Yep.
then there's never a kickback going back to forensics. Well, we took the money away from you, so you don't get the revenue credit, but I'm not going to give you credit anyway from hosting. So they come to us and
Right.
say, well, you have forensics, but you show no income. As a matter of fact, you're actually losing money. And I'm like, well, if you hadn't given everything away for free and the farm,
then we'd be doing okay, right?
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what the premise was. In the time leading up to founding Downstream, though, when CJ and I were on our own, that's where we said, not only does forensics get a whole lot of love and attention, mobile devices are up and coming, and nobody's paying attention to that. How to collect those, how to collect those remotely. And next thing you know is 4 months later, some bat escapes from a cave in Wuhan and starts biting and infecting people. And now everybody's remote.
Cave, that's the ticket.
So the platform that we built
Hold on,
to be able to collect them remotely is
Andreas said that he spent a few months
Yeah.
in
Southeast Asia, remote parts of the world.
Okay.
There we go. Conspiracy theories. Well, I had to go set up the business somehow, right? I had to create a need.
Of course.
And I think that's what I did. But no, that's what we did. Before we became official, we had built a remote collection toolkit allowing us to collect anything, whether it's cloud-based, whether it's mobile devices, but in hands of the custodian. So not your traditional carry-on size briefcase or the 10-pound laptop and cables and having to own Wi-Fi, but like a small device you can literally fit in your shirt pocket. I mean, it's literally like tiny, that can go collect your phone. You can see what we're doing. We can collect your email at the same time, pull your Facebook account if you want to, collect websites, but right there in front of you. And not even that, it also allowed us, and you both know that very well, if you went to a custodian and still go 5-6 years ago and said, hey, I need to go image your phone, it was grab everything or nothing. Right. And they were like, well, hell no, it's my phone, it's my personal stuff. Now with COVID, or we're still kind of in COVID or post the big COVID, having to be completely remote, people were using their personal devices. So you have your family pictures, your health history, your banking on your phone alongside your company email and company files. And now we're going to, and we're like, well, we either have to collect everything or nothing. But with like remote stream, for example, we're able to actually filter in place. So, and we do it in front of you, transparency, right? They can see what we're doing. And that's how we were able to get around all of the objections. My newest case is, for high profile celebrities that I can't name for obvious reasons. And they're like, no, you can't. And once I explained the process to them, I'm like, nothing leaves your hands. I don't even hop onto your Wi-Fi. I go through LTE. Nothing leaves your hands. You can see what we're walking away with, and you can take the original data and we're going to shred it in front of you. We're going to take the cross cutter and documents are gone. And that's how we are able to circumvent this while keeping the security in place.
Cool. Awesome. So before we move on to the rapid fire question segment, Tom, anything else you want to dig into here?
Well, I'd just like to, real quickly, you mentioned at the onset about certifications and the difference with certifications versus hands-on experience, and the latter being something that's very, very American, U.S. experience. We're very much a, learn as you go, teach yourself, almost anti-academic to some extent. But with the rise of demand for forensics collections, are you seeing that change at all, Andreas? Are you seeing any more insistence on some sort of certification or any sort of rise of standardization or standards that are required? Or is it still pretty much, I've done this, I've been doing it for years. What I find, at least because we've got a guy here in town, is that he's got testimonial experience. So once I say to a lawyer, look, he's got some certifications. He doesn't have all of these certifications, but he's testified in federal court 30 times and been accepted by a federal judge, and not challenged. And that, okay, that's good. If you got the testimonial experience, that's sort of the key, the holy grail, I guess.
Yeah. So on the certification route, and I'll give you a quick 30-second example, so we're not spending too much time or run out of time. But I testified in court recently in Texas in San Antonio on a civil lawsuit or in a civil lawsuit, and the
Who
opposing
was the
side, we
judge?
were it was a beautiful, beautiful lady. I loved her.
No, no,
I'll look
that's
it up
fine.
and get back to you.
No, no,
I'll
no.
get back to you.
I know one federal judge in San Antonio, and he is not a beautiful lady.
um, yeah, I think she's state level. She covers all the way San Antonio down to Uvalde, in essence, so close to
Right.
the border, which is very interesting. Because
Yeah.
that's where I went the first time to go testify. But long story short, the opposing side's expert literally came with a CV that was 20 pages long.
Yeah.
And it's certification after certification, training after training, and we were defendants. Other side was plaintiff. So when it was my time to sit there for 7 hours in a very uncomfortable seat next to the judge, being examined and cross-examined, the opposing side's attorney kept asking me about, do you have this certification? Do you have that certification? I'm like, no, I don't. And then he tried to cut me off, and I'm like, my attorney had told me that I can say, hey, let me finish, please. And I said, well, wait a minute, let me finish. I said, the problem is that you can't just say, do you have this certification or that certification? There's two different types of certifications. One of them is from a how do things work perspective, right? How is data stored on my hard drive? Right? Where do my logs sit? Well, and then the other one is, well, how do I push a button application does the work for me? So
yeah,
I don't know how exactly a motor works because I don't work with motors. Nobody has ever showed me what a motor or trained me. However, I do know how to drive a car. And so that's how I pushed back in front of the judge. And I'm like, when I look at his certifications, they're all application specific. None of them actually teach you digital forensics. They only teach you how to use EnCase. They only teach you how to use Axiom and Cellbrite. But when Cellbrite parses the data out, do you know where it comes from? Do you know what to look for in the data? Because Cellbrite doesn't tell you, well, this is the log.
It's not going to flag it, right?
Exactly. Right. The software isn't that smart.
Only because they haven't yet integrated ChatGPT into it. But once they do,
that's right. Once they get that piece knocked down,
that's the answer.
It's right there at the cusp. So to answer your original question, Tom, I am all for application training, but we can easily do that, especially for new employees. I tend to hire, believe it or not, gamers, because they are the ones who have to think on their feet, last minute, outside the box, high stress. If you play adventure games or tactical games or something else, that's type of how your brain needs to be wired. And that's what I tend to hire. Some of them have a college degree in digital forensics, like from Champlain College. Others have worked at a doctor's office in records.
Yeah.
I've had one person that was a pizza delivery guy.
Yeah.
Right.
No, that's a great answer. I like that distinction on the certifications. That's going to be useful for me as well. Thanks.
Yep.
Most welcome.
Yeah, but it's absolutely, because when it comes down to it, it really is just about attention to detail and not being afraid to ask when you don't actually understand something in order to figure out how to get it to work, which ties back into the blog posts and everything else. So yeah, cool.
Good.
Okay, so we've got we're quickly running out of time, so we've got a couple of quick questions to run you through before Tom will take us out. So my first question for you is, if you could have a lifetime unlimited supply of any one thing, what would it be?
Water.
Water. Okay, I assume drinkable water.
Drinkable water, absolutely, yes.
Because otherwise, just go out to the ocean.
Drinking water, correct.
Okay. And this should be interesting based off of your travels, but what is the weirdest thing that you've ever eaten?
Can I name two?
Yes, absolutely. But only if they're weird.
Tarantula and ant egg salad. Tarantula in Cambodia that was deep fried, and ant egg salad in Thailand on the beach. Ant egg, yeah, like ant larvae, ant eggs. Yeah, it was just a fresh vegetable fruit salad with ant eggs sprinkled all over it.
Was it good?
It was actually quite tasty. I was surprised. Yeah, even the tarantula tastes like chicken, they say, right?
Right. If you could learn one professional skill that you do not have today, what would it be?
Play a musical instrument.
Okay. Any specific one?
Probably piano or guitar.
Okay. Cool. What's your favorite sport?
Tennis, hands down, all
Tennis.
day, every day.
Watching or playing?
Pardon me?
Watching or playing, or both?
Both, actually, both. I totally love playing tennis. There's no other sport I would trade for that.
Okay. Cool. And last one, what piece of advice, just one line, would you give to your younger self? Moving to America, coming over here, what one piece of advice looking back would you give in retrospect?
Sit back, relax, don't take it to heart. Take a breather, then respond or act, i.e. slow down.
Excellent piece of advice. I think we all could use that in all aspects of life.
Yeah.
So, Tom, all yours.
Okay, I've got, before we go to our last question, my penultimate question is a rapid fire as well. Beatles or Stones?
Stones.
There we go. I knew I liked you for a reason. Thank you. We have a winner. Okay. Our last question, which we chatted, we'd tell everybody about this so they can ponder it. But if you could spend a day with someone or some group of people in our profession, living or dead, who would that be, and what would you? I'm sorry.
Defined very broadly, not the living or dead part. Those
I
are,
was going to say
clearly
that's
defined.
kind of that's a binary
By our
question,
profession.
right? Yeah,
No
by our
zombies
profession,
allowed.
yeah, we mean humanity.
Yeah, yeah. But our profession.
Yeah, who would that be, and what would you do with them?
Absolutely. Good question. I would say the founding fathers. The timing would be right before signing of the Declaration of Independence.
Oh.
And the whole reason what I would do with them, I would literally just sit back and listen, see how people interact, how they negotiate, come to terms, find common grounds. I found it extremely fascinating, especially in this day and age where you don't see that. Even think about it in our industry, and that's why it directly relates. You have opposing sides in a lawsuit. Trying to get those two sides to agree to something is difficult. There is a reason why judges, have approached me and other folks in the industry, and the judge literally said, okay, you two go in this room, you get bread and water, you guys figure it out and come back and tell the attorneys what we're going to do and how we're going to do it.
Yeah, I've had that experience. Yep.
So then that's the whole thing. I think I could learn.
Why judges have a job, right?
Yeah,
that's true too.
Yeah,
but yeah, no, that's a great answer because it's really the amount of compromise that it took to get that document done. It's a great lesson. Everyone likes to say what oh, this is or isn't what the founding fathers were thinking when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, but it doesn't really matter because those same people, if they were living today, would be able to adapt to the times and work out because they were willing to listen and talk to the other side and give the other side what they actually needed.
So we would actually have a functioning Congress. I love that.
Yeah,
let's bring them back. Let's bring them all back.
Will Rogers, however, once observed that not having a functioning Congress may be a good thing for the people. And we should leave them to stumble around. Well, we are out of time, as you said, Andres. It would be wonderful to have several hours to continue some of these threads, and we certainly, and that's one of the things we talk about in doing these chats is we think of them as running into somebody in the hallway at a tech show, at a conference, at a meeting, and trying to catch up and talk about things. So certainly encourage people who may run into you at something like Legal Week or ILTA or any of the shows that are around to continue some of these threads and continue discussions as we will when we see you. That's the other thing COVID interrupted was the that face to face. And what have you been up to lately? Really appreciate your taking the time to share your thoughts with us. This has been great.
Yeah,
My pleasure.
well,
All right.
will we see you in a couple weeks in New York?
Absolutely. I shall be there. I'm actually on the panel of emerging technologies on Thursday at 11 a.m. New York
Great.
time or local time. So, and I look forward to hopefully seeing both of you there.
Absolutely.
All right.
Beautiful. We
Very
shall
good.
raise a non-alcoholic beverage.
Well, I shall. You
to each
guys are
other.
free to
Right,
drink.
we can do whatever we want.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we're not going to tell Tom that ours isn't really non-alcoholic.
That's
but
right. That's
we'll
right.
pretend we're in this
Yeah.
together.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, we fully support you, Tom. So-
Thank you. I
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
No, thank
I
you so
appreciate
much. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time and the opportunity. It was awesome seeing both of you fine gents.
it. All
Thank
right.
you.
Our pleasure. Thanks again,
Look forward to seeing you soon.
Rachi. Thanks for your time as always. And we will see all of you fine folks, if not in New York at Legal Week coming up here. We'll see you back again on the eDiscovery channel sometime. Thanks so much.